there's been much that's been written about the relationship between Rav Soloveitchik and the Lubavitcher Rebbe, going back to their days together in Berlin. How did you see that relationship between those two great Torah giants? And a second question, how did Rav Soloveitchik become an expert in the Tanya? And I think you mentioned there also that he, whether jokingly or not, said that he could have written a perush, an interpretation and commentary on the Tanya.
Okay, so first of all, his relationship to Chabad, to the movement of, we call Lubavitch, goes back to his early days in the town of Chaslovich, where his father was the town rabbi, where many of the residents were Chabad, and the cheder that the Rav was sent to as a boy was a Chabadnik. The teacher with the Rebbe, the Melamed, was a Chabadnik. The family went to Brisk to the grandfather for Pesach, and Reb Chaim, the great Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, wanted to know what his grandson has accomplished so far in a few months of cheder, in Torah, in Mishnah, in Halacha. He actually knew very little from that cheder, but he did know the stories of the Rebbes. He knew the story of the first Rebbe, the next Rebbe, and he was able to quote from the Tanya by heart, a few sentences, because that's what this Melamed was teaching. So he had this very, very early exposure to Chabad. What happened was Reb Chaim tells his son to take him out of the cheder, and the Rav was actually homeschooled from age 6 or 7 until age 19. Rav never went to a yeshiva, which is fabulous, very interesting in itself. But in 1926, when the family resided then in Warsaw, after World War I, the Rav decides to go to the Polish University for a year or two, and then he moves on to Berlin in 1926 to study philosophy. Now, Berlin was the center of philosophical studies, and he meets up there with two future giants. One would be Rav Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who was then the son-in-law of the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe, and the other was Rav Yitzchak Hutner, to become the great Rosh Yeshiva of the Chaim Berlin Yeshiva, the author of the Pachad Yitzchak Svarim. With Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rav told me that there was this very introverted student there with a kippah, and the Rav was told that he's the son-in-law of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and the Rav befriended him. Rav took the initiative to get to know him, and they became friends. I mean, friends. You know, they didn't go out to the ball games. They had things in common to talk about. And it's interesting that the Rav told me that in the lecture hall, the Rav Menachem Mendel Schneerson would have Sifrei Kodesh, whether it's Halacha or Kabbalah, in a stand-up position. He told me like a Sephardi Sefer Torah stand-up, and his head would be buried into these Sfarim as if he wasn't paying attention to anything going on in the lecture. Yet when it came to the end of the semester, it was clear that Menachem Mendel Schneerson did better than all the other students. So his mind was functioning simultaneously on two frequencies. The Rav said this was the most amazing mind he's seen in his life. And the Rav has seen good minds in his life. That's for sure. So he was a good friend, which carried on later on in New York into the great last meeting in 1980 at the 770, where the Rebbe celebrated his 30th year of being Rebbe, and the Rav went, and that I speak about in the book as well. But the Tanya fascinated the Rav, just like any other book of Jewish thought. I mean, the Rav read, obviously, not only the Rambam's Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide to the Perplexed, but Yehuda Levi's Kuzari and the Maharal, and anything that was of a thoughtful nature. The Rav was interested, inspired. He wanted to see other trends and so on. So Chabad had a lot to offer on the intellectual side. You would never think that the Rav was identifying with Chabad as somebody at the airport asking you if you put tefillin on this morning. He wasn't that activistic of a Chabadnik, but he did say that if my arm was twisted and it had to be a chassid, I would choose Chabad, and that was because of his intellectual connection with the movement. He would cite Tanya in various junctures of public lectures. This wouldn't happen in the day-to-day Gemara shir, but in public lectures to make certain points. I recall that he would cite the Tanya. Now, he told my older brother, Rabbi Yosef Adler, that he's writing a little running commentary, and he kibitzed, and he said that, you know, maybe one day the world's going to find out that I knew the Tanya better than the Rebbe. But aside that was just a fit of humor, not to be taken all too seriously. But it did show that he felt he had a handle on the Sefer, and he really knew what this was all about. So studying the Tanya was not like a Lubavitcher Chassid studying the Tanya, reading it religiously, like some people read Tillim. He was reading it deeply, comparing it to Rambam and to others, and so on. So he liked the Rebbe personally very, very much.